Tendai Mwadi, be thankful unto the Most High, Mother, Father, Creator of the universe. Uncle Jasinib, that's life, prosperity, and health as spoken in the ancient Kemetu language. Hotep means peace, or Hulu means freedom. Abibi Fahodie, Abibi Tumi, African power, black power for all African people. Greetings, my name is ShakaRa, your resident cultural scientist, among other things. And this presentation is entitled Black History Month is Dead. Black History Month is dead, with a question mark. As you can see, I'm not necessarily making a statement here. I am posing a question. And this presentation comes out of a presentation constructed by my father, spiritual leader of the Al-Kebala Revivalist movement, brother leader Mbandaka, which is entitled The History of Black History Month. And it does what it says on the tin. It's designed basically to give people an understanding of the origin of Black History Month and the purpose that Black History Month was designed to serve and is designed to serve, especially in relation to some of the distortions that we were seeing around Black History celebrations, and also some of the conversations that continue to take place within the Black African community around the world and in the UK. So coming out of that, I considered it to be prudent to look at Black History Month in terms of what it says about us and our identity in this world and our understanding of the purpose of history, yeah? And so this presentation does exactly that. It looks at the extent to which Black History Month is, or how we celebrate Black History Month, is a reflection of our self-identity and what our self-identity says about how we look at our history, and how we look at our history says about the goals that we perceive to achieve for our future development, not just as individuals, but collectively as a people. And so that is the purpose of this presentation. The reason for the title will become clear as we go forward. And so to start, we're going to just outline a few of the key questions that we're going to be asking, all right? So the key questions. Why do we allow them to give us a month to celebrate our history? These are some of that's one of the main questions that you hear every Black History Month. The idea that there is an elusive them. We never necessarily define who them is, yeah, but them apparently gave us Black History Month, all right? Why do we allow them to give us a month to celebrate our history? We're going to be exploring the extent to which that is the case, if that is even the case, yeah? And who is them? And if so, why are we allowing it? We're going to explore all that, all right? And hopefully, by the end of the presentation, those who are listening and understand will never see fit to ask that particular question ever again. And then there is Black History Month about celebrating African American history? This question is being asked, particularly for Black people that live in majority Black nations. Often question, why is it that we need to celebrate Black History Month? They feel that they can understand why we who live in the UK, or we who live in America, or we who live in the rest of Europe, might need a Black History Month because, obviously it's obvious that we live in a majority white country whereby the history of our people may not be properly appreciated. And so do we need it in majority Black nations? So we're going to be exploring that. It's them thing. It's a Black American thing. We're going to be exploring that also. How does Black History Month affect Black identity? Yeah? How does Black History Month affect Black identity? And finally, what is the proper use or purpose of history? Okay? All right. So we're going to begin. I like to define things when I'm doing presentations. So we're going to begin by giving definitions of history. And the first set of definitions comes from the expert, the authority on all things semantical when it comes to the English language, and that is the Oxford Dictionary. Yeah. So what is the purpose of history is our section that we're in at the moment, and we're going to be getting some dictionary definitions. Oxford informs us this history is the study of past events, particularly in human affairs. The study of past events, particularly in human affairs. Yeah? Okay, so we see that, generally speaking, when we as human beings speak of history, we are talking about history that relates to ourselves and our species. 2, the whole history of past events, the whole history of past events connected with a particular person or thing. Yeah, each of us has an individual history. Okay, there is the history for different things in the world. So the history, for example, of the London bus, yeah, and you got the Museum of Transport that will take you through a history of these various different modes of transportation. And then finally, the continuous, typically chronological record of important or public events or of a particular trend or institution. The history of the Nile Valley, for example. The history of hip hop or reggae music would be another example of that. The history of democracy or parliamentary style governments, yeah, as an institution. This would all, apply in this regard, okay? However, I want to develop on this definition because this comes from Oxford, and I want to see what some of our more African-centered historical experts have to say in terms of defining history, because we may find that these definitions are more applicable to ourselves as Black people and our condition in this time. And so first up, we're going to go to the Black history man himself, the one and only Brother Robin Walker. Yes, indeed, kings and queens, you can see him pictured here, holding two of his books. You know what I'm saying? One is about musical traditions and literature as it relates to Black people, and the other is a school textbook by the name of Black History Matters that goes all the way from ancient Nile Valley up until today, kings and queens. And I do encourage you to get anything that Brother Robin Walker has written. He is one of my teachers, and as one of my teachers, he informs us that history in its broadest sense contains all knowledge not acquired in the present. All knowledge not acquired in the present. Yeah? In its broadest sense, that is what history is. And this resonated with me when I first heard it from him, because this is how we were taught in the Al-Qaeda Revivalist movement in our children's program when we were growing up. And this is how we teach in our Saturday school, yeah? To explain this a little bit further, and I know that Robin Walker teaches this, every discipline that we learn when we go to school, college, university, in all forms of formal education, are in fact very implicitly the history or the study of the history of said disciplines. So if we are studying mathematics, really we are studying the accumulated knowledge in mathematics up until this point, yeah? Again, the history of mathematics up until this point. New knowledge of mathematical principles will develop from this point and will become history for those who come after us. When we study science, we are actually studying the accumulated knowledge in biology, chemistry, and physics up until this point. And to give greater, more explicit explanation about this reality, we can look at how things are referred to, how things are named, and how things are defined. The most popular example being the fact that we have a theorem in mathematics, as we are taught in school, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. This theorem is described as the Pythagoras theorem or the Pythagorean theorem. It's named after an individual called Pythagoras, a person who is important in the development of what we now call European history. Understanding that Europe, for the Europeans and Europe in general, the cultural center or the cultural origin of European history is considered to be Greece and Rome. And so this particular Greco figure or Greek figure, Pythagoras, introduced this theory into Greece. And because the Europeans, modern day Europeans, inherit the traditions of Greece, they name the theory after that particular individual because he's important to their history. The same goes for Newton's laws of motion. Newton is a very important scientist within the European or the development of European society. Therefore, they name the laws after him. However, if we as African people understand that Pythagoras studied in Kemet, then we may call the theory something different. We may call it Imhotep theory, because we understand that, if, for example, Imhotep is responsible for building one of the Great Pyramids, the Step Pyramid. And so we understand that this theory had to have been understood by those people who built those pyramids, if they were able to succeed in building the pyramids, kings and queens. Yeah, so we may call it Jossa's theorem. Yeah, because we understand that under the Nesuts, so-called pharaoh Jossa, great pyramids were built. Yeah, and these things. So that's the difference between coming from a Eurocentric center and an African center. All right, kings and queens. I hope that makes sense. All knowledge not acquired in the present. Everything has a history. Everything that currently exists has a history, okay? And so we're emphasizing this because Oxford gave us definitions that were very detached, yes? Treats history as an object. And we consider it the case that this is probably why many of us in the study of history in school were saying things like, why do I need to know that? Why is it important? Because they teach history in very detached ways. We don't see ourselves as a part of the history that is being taught. And so immediately the sentence, history in its broadest sense contains all knowledge not acquired in the present. Immediately we bring ourselves into history, okay? Because all knowledge. Yes, all knowledge production becomes a part of history. But we're going to go in a little bit further, go in a little bit more. And we're going to go from the master teacher, Brother Robin Walker, to the grand master teacher, now ancestor, Baba John Henrik Clark. Yes, indeed, kings and queens. If you don't know, get to know. And he teaches us, history is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is also a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells a people where they have been and what they have been, where they are and what they are. And most importantly, history tells a people where they still must go and what they still must be. Yes, indeed, kings and queens, a powerful rendition or definition of history given to us by our grand master teacher. Let's break it down, yeah? And I'm breaking it down now how I would normally break it down to my students in the Al-Kebalan Academy of Excellence or the Ma'at Academy of Excellence, because I teach in these independent African-centered educational institutions. History is a clock, yeah? What do we use a clock for? Yes, we use a clock or a watch as a device for telling the time. A clock is in fact our creative ingenuity as human beings replicating the role of the sun in ancient times. We plan our days, yes, by our clocks and our watches. We know where we need to be, yes, and at what time, according to the fact that there is a concept called time, and we know how to tell it. We wake up in the morning at a certain time in order to get to work for a certain time, and we count the hours down until the end of the day and leave and get home at a particular time. If we don't know the time, then we are not organized in our day. If we don't know the time, we don't know when and where we have to be at the appropriate moment. Okay, kings and queens? All right, and I'm hoping that is making sense. The analogy should speak for itself. It is also even more interesting for me. He says, it is also a compass. By the way, sorry, I want to emphasize two words here, which is political and cultural. Yes, political and cultural. There's a purpose for being able to know what part of the day you're in, and that is political and cultural. We're going to come back to that in later on in the presentation, but just for now, log that, kings and queens. Log that in your minds, all right? Okay. It is also a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. Beautiful metaphor. What is a compass? A compass is a device that we use to find our direction. The compass points north, or what they call true north. And once we found true north, we are able to see where east, west, and south is, and therefore chart and navigate our journeys from that point. So history, therefore, as Baba John Henrik Clarke is teaching us, gives us a tool, yes, for us to be able to plan a specific journey. And the analogy that I always use with my students is, if I am in the Atlantic Ocean and you are in the Pacific Ocean, and we are both on ships trying to get to Great Mama Africa, does the compass that I am using assist you in the Pacific Ocean making the journey to Mama Africa? And me in the Atlantic Ocean, does the compass that you are using in the Pacific Ocean assist me in making my journey to Mama Africa? And of course, the answer is no. You have to use your own compass from where you are. The compass is only valid if it is able to chart you from the position that you are currently in at this moment in time. So it presumes, therefore, that you have to know where you're there. You have to know where you are and where you want to go, and decide, have an understanding of what you will need to do to get there, chart your course, measure your directions and your distances, and make that journey, okay? So, as that relates to history and the history of a group of people, that group of people, therefore, must know where they are in the historical moment. And they cannot use another person's compass to decide how they are going to reach their goal. Okay? I hope that makes sense. All right? History tells a people where they have been and what they have been, where they are and what they are. And most important, history tells a people where they still must go and what they still must be. We're going to be delving deeper into that at the end of this presentation. But for now, again, we're stepping away from these detached, one-dimensional definitions of history as is given by Oxford. Our definition of history here already gives us an inclination about the purpose of history. History has a function in today's world whereby it gives us information that tells us what we must do and how we must proceed from the position that we are in at the moment. History does that if we have a proper appreciation of history and our understanding of history is properly understood. Okay? So we've got a definition from the grand master teacher, Baba John Henrik Clarke. I want to introduce some terminology into the situation right about now. And this terminology is collective memory. Yeah, obviously collective relating to a group of people. But let's define memory. And this particular definition is taken from Human Physiology, From Cells to Systems by Laura Lee Sherwood, yeah? And she defines memory thusly. Memory is the storage of acquired knowledge for later recall, yeah? So now, be clear, I'm equating history with the concept of collective memory, yeah? Memory now in the individual sense, again, is the storage of acquired knowledge for later recall. Learning and memory, not the use of the term learning, form the basis by which individuals adapt their behavior to their particular external circumstances. Without these mechanisms, it would be impossible for individuals to plan for successful interactions and to intentionally avoid predictably disagreeable circumstances. So the first point here is that memory is an essential component of learning. To be able to recall information is an essential component of learning. And that learning experience that is based at least partly on the foundation of memory gives us the capacity to consciously shape our behavior to the circumstances that are around us. Imagine you walked out of your house in the morning. At some point throughout the day, you lost your memory. How would you function? How would you know how to get home? How would you know there's a concept called home? How would you know how to navigate the environment that is around you? You see a bus. How do you relate to the bus? You see other people around you. How do you relate to those people? Yeah? So memory is essential to all of our individual lives. I'm going to ask a question. Consider it for a second. How much of your everyday life, as you live it right now, is based upon your understanding of history? Put it on a scale of 1 to 10 or give it a percentage. Ponder that question. I'm not even going to answer it for you, yeah? But consider for yourself how much of your everyday life that you live right about now is based upon your understanding of history. Yes? She goes on, without these mechanisms, it would be impossible for individuals to plan for successful interactions and to intentionally avoid predictably disagreeable circumstances. Very interesting. So, take it from the individual level now, yes, and magnify it to the collective level. If individuals are unable to function without a memory, what about collectives, groups of people? Yes? And if a group of people is taught, for example, African people, yes, that as it was taught not too long ago, that we come from a place called Africa. But not only that do we come from a place called Africa, but Africa is a continent of darkness. Africa is a continent of darkness. The dark continent, Africa. And not only do we come from Africa, that is a continent of darkness, the dark continent, dark in European or Eurocentric metaphoric use, is synonymous with lack of knowledge, is synonymous with wickedness, evil, barbarism, lack of civilization, lack of sophistication, and all these things. We black people come from a place called Africa, that is the dark continent, and that there is a place called Europe that brought civilization to the world, that brought art, science, mathematics, religion, and architecture to the world. And therefore, by contrast, Europe is the continent of light. Europe and the children of Europe go around the world spreading knowledge, wisdom, and understanding to everybody, especially these people from this dark continent called Africa. What kind of life do you think the people that are subjected to that kind of understanding of themselves and their origins are going to live out? Would they be able to function, adapt their behavior to their particular external circumstances? Will they be able to successfully interact intentionally and avoid predictably disagreeable circumstances? Will such a group of people, be able to do that? Yeah? The answer is obviously no. So we see the importance of history, kings and queens. All right? It will be true to say, however, that many of us who have been engaged in the discipline of studying African history have come to the realization that not only did Africa have a great and illustrious history, but that there is no history before there is African history. Or to quote the popular phrase, before there was any history, there was Black history, kings and queens. And yes, indeed, you can see an example of Black history here. In the history of Black History Month presentations, we will go into, at this point, some specific information about ancient African history. But we're not going to do that today because we have other things to get into. But you can see the Hert M. Akhet, misnomered the Sphinx, in front of three Great Pyramids, in this image. And these are all dating back to pre-dynastic times in the Nile Valley, as well as the pyramids dating back to early or old kingdom Kemet kings and queens. Yes, indeed, in around the first three dynasties, So do bear that in mind. And another day, we'll go into more history about that. But for now, our historians are beginning to unearth the fact that before there was any history, there was Black history. Why? Because Africa is the birthplace of humanity and the cradle of civilization. So what happened? How did we go as African people from an understanding that tells us that Africa is the birthplace of humanity and the cradle of civilization, that our history is great, our history is illustrious, that we have made great contributions to science, technology, architecture, spirituality, religion, and all areas of human activity? How do we go from that to being indoctrinated into a society that tells us Africa is the continent of darkness and African people are products of that continent of darkness? Well, for that, we're going to turn to the great and illustrious book, When We Ruled, by Robin Walker. Yes, indeed. This great and illustrious book to give us some information as to what process, took us from having that great and illustrious history to where we are today. And we're going to take it from the chapter entitled A Survey of the Documents, whereby he's just giving an appraisal of the popular primary and secondary resources, through which we can begin the investigation of our ancient history. And so in the conclusion to this chapter, which is subtitled Issues Raised, he says the following: the reader may well wonder why none of this information is common knowledge today. But in 1871 and 1907, most of it was in the mainstream. While the above is a small sample of the literature that is out there, it is sufficient to demonstrate that what now masquerades as world history is largely fictitious. The key issue is that in 1871, only Europeans would have been reading this material. It was for their eyes only. The current make-believe historians that locate Europeans or Mediterraneans as the founders of civilization itself were fabricated over the last 100 years. Only the last 100 years. This time, however, the material was aimed at a world readership. To pull this off, European scholars had to forget or pretend to forget all that they previously knew about Africans and their history. By the year 1900, European control over the world by colonial conquest was almost complete. In addition, they seized control over the media and educational systems of the world. Therefore, what the world learned about itself came from or through a European source. Consequently, only stereotypes of non-whites were ever going to escape the censorship. In the case of the Far East Asians, no scholarship ever located them as the original founders of civilization itself. The mainstream could therefore tolerate Chinese history since it did not clash with the 20th century fabrication that the Europeans were the original founders of civilization. The mainstream could not, however, tolerate black history. Thus, it became important for the propagandists, aka historians, to deny that the above literature even existed, or if not, deny that terms like Ethiopians, Libyans, Cushites, Hamites, Moors, Zanj, and Sudanese refer to Negroes, unless, of course, such people were captured slaves. If that failed, the mainstream bitterly attacked the credibility of the ancient and the modern scholars. That was not an entirely satisfactory approach, since European historical scholarship is itself built upon the foundations laid by Herodotus, Devoni, Dupuis, Sir William Jones, Champollion, Rawlinson, and Darwin. To attack these scholars was therefore equivalent to scoring an own goal. The final and most modern approach is to claim that modern authority is worth more than ancient documentation. It was all in vain because, as Leo Frobenius put it, quote, the spell has been broken. Moreover, quote, the buried treasures of antiquity again revisit the sun. Yes, indeed, kings and queens, very important there. So we understand now the purpose for why this collective amnesia meaning the loss of memory, was induced in us as black people. Yes? It's not an accident of history. It was designed to suit a particular purpose, to rob a people of their collective memory, and therefore they become dysfunctional, unable to productively relate, yes, and function in accordance with the world that is around them, and to perceive the dangers that are around them. Also, kings and queens, reminding ourselves of the definition of memory that was given earlier, all right? And so this wraps up this particular section of the presentation in terms of what is history, yeah? We even touched a little bit on the purpose of history, but now we're going to go forward and talk about why, based upon this backdrop, yes, of the fact that a collective amnesia was induced in African people for the sake of facilitating European enslavement of African people and colonization of Africa and African people. Yeah, that's the reason why this collective amnesia was induced. How did we begin now to respond to this when we were seeking to liberate ourselves, to free ourselves and come out of that condition? Well, one of the first things that we did was to try and rewrite our history. And so we're going to go into the next section. But before we do that, we just want to make sure you are aware of the book once again, When We Rule. Yeah, this is the most comprehensive, up-to-date text that gives you an overview of African history from ancient times up until the present, kings and queens. So we want to encourage you to get that book, and shout out to the master teacher, Robin Walker. Okay, so what is the origin of Black History Month?